I recall some of the humorous names that you had for the different guards, and seemed like a way of combating their attacks on you without them even realizing what you were doing, but inwardly you knew that you were in a sense belittling them and bringing them down to size.
Well, I think every one of us who went through the camps had our names for the guards based on characteristics or whatever. And you're right, because by giving them a nickname, which was a humorous name, which picked out some weakness or frailty of theirs, you diminished the threat that they actually posed to you as guards, able to inflict any kind of pain on you they wanted to. Simply by doing this one thing, we diminished the threat. Now, they never really knew what we called them. That was where to them we called them whatever we were supposed to. To ourselves, we had one that we called Cheetah. And Cheetah was the obvious missing link between man and ape, the virtual Neanderthal reject. And Cheetah had a very overblown impression of himself. His IQ, I imagine, ran somewhere in the -70s. He was not even skilled in his own language, in Vietnamese, but he was attempting to learn English. And we helped him a couple of times, which put him in really bad shape. But there was a foil that we used for what we were going through. And you could always look at Cheetah, and as soon as you thought Cheetah, you smiled. And that was what you needed. That was just that little ray, enough to curl the corners of your lips up, and you had a smile where otherwise you were down. And that is true. That was one of the important things. The other thing was, fortunately for me, we were in the South, and we were in a swamp forest, so there were animals. And being in Special Forces, nature was something I was accustomed to enjoying. And so I would look out, I would see the animals, the birds, whatever, just to be able to see the sky. When there was not double canopy overhead. It was like taking a deep breath. If I had been in a cell, locked away from all of that, it would have been much more difficult for me. But again, there I was in the optimum environment. If I had to suffer, that was a place to do it, because at least there was nature around me that I could draw sustenance from, I could draw a spiritual uplift from. Again, praying. That's the biggest chapel you've got. But wherever you were as a POW, that was your chapel. So it all just seemed to form into an environment which was supposed to be hostile, but I found things within it that helped me.
Well, the most touching incidents that I know that you've talked about was of the development of the two pets, the two eagles that you had, and maybe you could relate some of that.
That was during a period of time. I was in isolation at the time. I was in a camp with guards only, and the U Min forest was burned off, and it was a tremendous fire. And the guards went out to fight it. It was burning all around the camp and endangering the camp, everybody in it. And one afternoon, the guards came back, and one of the guards dropped two little balls of fluff on the floor of my cage, and he said, "Here, take these." And they were two little forest eagles. Apparently the mother eagle had left the nest, and the guards had found it. Well, there was no idea among the guards that I could do anything with them. They just tossed them in. They had brought them back. They were too small to eat, so the guards brought them back. And I raised them. I became a father eagle. And it was giving them something of whatever I had. And of course, it became more and more difficult as they grew. Initially, they ate just little bits of fish. And they learned to eat rice, which I don't think most eagles do. But in Vietnam, everything ate rice. So they learned to eat some rice. But they grew and they flourished. And named one of them Herc and the other Ajax. And they learned to fly, and I taught them to fly. And they were loyal. You know, as far as they were concerned, I was a parent. I was a strange-looking bird, or they were waiting for their wings to change so that they could look like me. But you knew there was a little question in their mind about why is this strange-looking creature taking care of us, but he must be a parent. Well, I raised them, they learned to fly, but they wouldn't leave. I was hoping that they would leave, but they stayed at my cage. They were intimidating to the guards because the guards would come down to get me for, either knock me around or whatever. The first time they tried that, they faced 2 sets of talons because the eagles launched on them. Well, after that, the guards started to pick on the eagles. That was sort of tempered by the fact that the cadre used that as a sideshow when they had visiting cadre come in, was that here was an American prisoner who had raised 2 forest eagles. Of course, they took the credit for it happening, but the American was doing something which was unusual. And then one of the cadre, because he didn't want the eagles to leave, clipped the wings. One of the birds. And I think it was Ajax that he clipped his wings. Well, Herc wouldn't leave Ajax. And the horrible thing was to watch an eagle who had flown suddenly find out he couldn't fly. And to see him standing on top of that hut, flapping, frantically trying to get off the ground, seeing the other one up there circling. And you could see him die a little bit each day. And then the cadre told me that they were going to move the camp, and they were going to go ahead and kill my eagles. And that was probably the most difficult thing that I ever had to do, but I had seen the guards torture animals. And I knew that they would do that to the birds simply because they didn't like the birds. The guards would have had their chance at them. And I decided that if the birds were going to die, that I should be the one to do it, because at least they'd die quickly. And I tell you, Chaplain, that was the hardest thing I think that I had to do the whole time I was in, because the birds never once doubted me.
Ultimate trust.
Ultimate trust. And I had to kill them. I even laid Ajax's head down and put it over a little stick so I could chop it. He didn't even resist. I mean, no problem. He was just trusting this was another game that I was going to play with him, and he was willing to go along with it. And you talk about something that tears you up inside, knowing that there's total trust from that animal to you, and he's dead. Well, if the VC had known how low they had me at that point, if they hadn't been involved in, all these other things that they were doing, they could have torn me up. But for them, what's an animal? Me going down and killing the birds, they didn't realize the impact of that act on me. But that was hard. That was really hard.